Thank you so much to Abed, and thanks for all of the listeners for joining us for his recording. This is one of 3 recordings as part of our session, Ocean Diplomacy, How Common Threats to Shared Resources Can Overcome Politics.
Thank you so much, Fernando. Hi, everyone. So thank you for having me here. And I would like to thank all those who are attending our session. So I'm Abed from the CNRS of Lebanon, and I'm here to shed light on the Ocean Acidification Mediterranean Hub very briefly. But first, let's talk why are we interested in the Mediterranean. So the interest in the Mediterranean Sea did not start recently. It has took the attention of ancient civilizations who built their empires on its rims and used it in their economy routes, from Phoenicians to Pharaohs, Greeks, Romans, who called it Marum Nostrum, our sea, to many other impactful Mediterranean civilizations. Contemporarily, as Mediterranean countries have been shaped, their economic activities have been also booming and blooming in terms of wideness and impact on the semi-enclosed Mediterranean Sea, where so much Mediterranean communities rely on it, on its sea resources for their livelihoods, as the total annual revenue from fisheries alone, for example, is around $3.4 billion. And the majority of fleet composition is formed of small scale fishing, reflecting the role of vulnerable fishermen communities in the Mediterranean economy, actually. But also the Mediterranean is the sea bridge between the west and the east through the Strait of Gibraltar, Dardanelles channels, and between the north and the south through the Suez Channel. So it's a maritime shipping hub, harvesting more than 20% of seaborne trade, adding additional pressures on the Mediterranean Sea, such as rising CO2 emissions, pollution, marine litter, etc. In fact, the Mediterranean Sea is under multiple climatic and non-climatic stressors, as mentioned by the recent MEDAC report that mentioned that the effects of climate-related consequences, such as ocean acidification, on marine ecosystems of the Mediterranean Sea, and how actually endemic species are threatened to be extinct. So when excessive CO2 is absorbed from the atmosphere to the sea, more carbonic acid is forming in the sea, favoring the occurrence of ocean acidification that's in fact changing the chemistry of the entire Mediterranean Sea, favoring the occurrence and reducing the availability of crucial ions to many tiny creatures that are constituting the base of the marine trophic chain, and thus affecting the marine resources. So more than 500 studies and major projects in the Mediterranean already show that the Mediterranean Sea is affected by ocean acidification, which shows the necessity of better understanding of this phenomenon, not only by one nation or by few nations, but actually by all Mediterranean nations. So why? Because actually ocean acidification is a global condition. That's true, but it has many local effects affecting the chemistry and the biology of the sea. Goa'an had a vision to gather scientists working on ocean acidification to better quantify it. We were 150 scientists from 31 countries in 2013, and now we are 5-fold higher, more scientists trying to collaborate to better understand the threat worldwide. Scientists coming from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, races. We are overcoming everything in order to collaborate and to understand this phenomenon wherever in this world. And that's why actually Goa'an also has encouraged regional networks to enhance regional efforts in understanding ocean acidification and its potential impacts. And that's why we are now so far 8 regional hubs. One of them actually is the Ocean Acidification Mediterranean Hub. So this hub is gathering around 67 scientists from 10 Mediterranean countries so far, trying to improve the communication between the Mediterranean ocean acidification members to better study and understand the ocean acidification and its consequences in the Mediterranean. How? By promoting community best practices, simple methodologies and techniques by supporting the Mediterranean Ocean Acidification community via capacity building, north, south, east, west, trainings, newsletters, opportunities through creating communication between the different actually scientists, but also we are trying now recently to engage policymakers, stakeholders in order to better understand this phenomenon, but also to better tailor strategies, things like this. So we have many Mediterranean countries. We have Lebanon, we have France, we have Spain, we have Greece, Turkey, Italy, Egypt, Morocco, and the new entries now, Slovenia and Algeria. What we are doing, so we are working together in order to know together who's doing what, through surveys, through communications. We are trying to identify ways of collaboration, not only through projects, but also through cruises, intercomparisons, exercises, PhD and master students opportunities, things like this, to identify central labs in order to check how we can advance the the production of the certified reference materials in the Mediterranean, things like this. And actually, we are a UN voluntary commitment, so we are trying to also merge between science and diplomacy, between science and society through projects funded by the IAEA in order to see how people of the Mediterranean are perceiving the ocean and ocean acidification. We are trying also to give visibility to our work through impactful events such as, for example, the high-level political forum. We are trying also to give visibility to ocean acidification in itself and to reflect how we are collaborating through Ocean Acidification Week 2020 and also the recent one, 2021 in September, and through key events such as the Monaco Ocean Week, where we actually invited people from policymakers, stakeholders, not only scientists, but also for sure, because we are mainly scientists, we are also trying to participate in scientific events such as the Oslo. So climate change consequences know no boundaries, so we have to collaborate to save our future. Regional hubs are crucial to understand local ocean acidification trends and effects, thus a continuous support is needed. And implementing the UN Ocean Decade targets and the UN SDGs is essential, because through it we can actually significantly monitor and try to better understand what's happening in the Mediterranean Sea, but of course elsewhere if it's applied elsewhere as well, because this is how we can protect communities and the livelihoods of the most vulnerable communities. More funds to better understand ocean acidification and other climate change related consequences to improve the collaboration between scientists and consolidate bridges of communication between scientists, policymakers, stakeholders, and the public is needed. So it's time to act now to protect the most vulnerable communities actually, and to protect the marine coastal resources in our Mare Nostrum. It's time to create bridges, not walls. Thank you so much for your attention.
So Abed, how often does your group meet, and how are you doing your meetings between the scientists of Med Hub?
Thank you so much for this question, Fernando, and for everything, and for having me, actually. So we are relatively a new network, Fernando. So we've been established somehow in the late 2019, and then suddenly the pandemic has changed all our plans, actually. So we didn't meet so far in person, not even for once, but we've met actually many times virtually. We are trying to meet frequently virtually in order to tailor the roadmap of our network. So we are trying now to meet every 2 months, the Monday of every 2 months, and we have elected a steering committee in order to keep actually the momentum up, and a representative of every country, so we can better negotiate, we can better discuss how we see that this network can evolve and can proceed actually.
How are you working around language issues? Because I know the Mediterranean has, I can't even count how many languages. There must be over 10. How do you address issues with language to communicate not only within your group, but also externally to deliver the message, the scientific data to outside groups, politicians, decision makers?
We are actually trying to speak solely in English. But many members of the AAA Med Hub know other languages like French or Spanish, which is also comprehensible, but it's mainly English. It's mainly English, yeah.
And can you take us through how the program started? I mean, what was the urgency at the time? How did you, because I created a similar platform called the Trinational Initiative for Marine Science and Conservation in the Gulf of Mexico and Western Caribbean, which involves Cuba, Mexico, and the United States. So also 3 countries that don't always get along. And the impetus for that was looking at the Gulf as an enclosed body of water, very similar to the Mediterranean, and also finding that a lot of the threats were the same. Over-tourism, overfishing, ocean acidification, fisheries, transboundary issues. So that was our sort of urgency in 2007. But I'm interested in your story and how MedHub, or even the broader GOAN network, what were those, I guess, critical issues that helped move the platform to get it started? Because obviously it would have started with 1 or 2 or 3 countries at some point. How did it get to there? And then how did you, for example, how do you bring in these other countries? How did you get Slovenia and Italy on board?
So first, I will talk about GOAN. GOAN and its hubs actually are a voluntary reunion of different scientists who are actually voluntarily wanting to understand ocean acidification. They are wanting actually to collaborate and to be in this platform, in this network, to collaborate, to have projects to better understand ocean acidification phenomena. And it's actually, I contacted colleagues that I know, and these colleagues know other colleagues. So, and they were all positive, collaborative, cooperative. They were all convinced by the objective, which is to collaborate and to create this platform in order actually to gather north, south, east, west countries and scientists, and to finally, eventually better understand and to have this bridge between the scientists and the other components of the Mediterranean Sea, the public for sure, and stakeholders, policymakers.
Fantastic. Last question. What do you see as the future? What are the next issues that you're facing in the Mediterranean with ocean acidification? What worries you about the future of MedHub, and what gives you hope? Where are things working well?
Well, actually, what worries me now is this discrepancy. So between the northern and southern research, actually, because there are some gaps in the Mediterranean. So some sub-basins are not well studied. Other sub-basins or areas in the Mediterranean are very well studied, but the Mediterranean does not function that way. The Mediterranean is one unity, and the different water masses are circulating in all the Mediterranean and in all its sub-basins. And that's why, in order to really have the complete picture, we need to understand what's happening in the understudied, underrepresented areas of the Mediterranean Sea. And we have so much things in common, and that's why it's really essential to understand how to better cooperate, how to better tailor legislations and policies that can actually protect our resources, that can actually reduce our CO2 emissions, that can widen the marine protected areas in the Mediterranean Sea, things like this, but also scientifically speaking, to better know how our ecosystems and key species will respond to ocean acidification and to other stressors, because here we are in the era of multi-stressors. So it's not just related to ocean acidification, but also warming, eutrophication, pollution, and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
there are lots of things, but I'm always positive because I know that Mediterranean people are warm, and scientists as well, and they are able to cooperate. They are willing to cooperate and to how to say it, but to make this hub an exemplar of how we can overcome so much conflicts and how we can actually cooperate in order to understand a specific scientific question and to deliver good information to policymakers and to stakeholders and eventually to the public in order, for the public good.
Well, you certainly are an excellent example, and I know it's been through a lot of very hard work. It's why we're here with AAAS sharing these three and even my project, different examples of how this can be done. It takes a lot of bravery, but I think more than anything, conviction that science and data is a truth, and it holds wherever you're working. So, thank you, Abed. Thanks for being part of this panel, and any questions you can direct directly to Abed, who left his information on his slides. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. My name is Fernando Bretos. I am Program Officer for Blue Resilience Initiative at the Ocean Foundation. I'm joined by my colleague, Katie Thompson, who's also a Program Manager for the Blue Resilience Initiative at the Ocean Foundation. We work together on this panel. We work together in many ways as well. Thank you for joining us. We will explore ocean science diplomacy. It's sort of a newly coined term, if you will. It's a sort of a riff off of science diplomacy, which you've probably heard a lot about. They'll be announcing an award during this annual meeting, their annual Goldberg Award in Science Diplomacy, which really gives credit to very intrepid scientists who are working under difficult conditions, going back to Alexander von Humboldt in the 19th century, who was traveling through Napoleonic Europe to express the importance of science as a neutral body, as a field where people can work together in spite of politics. There's a need to capture information, to do it collaboratively. So this is an ongoing field. You're going to meet some of the scientists and policy people that are working very hard, bringing countries together to explore, find solutions, create new data streams, all in the spirit of really of exploration. But I think what's significant is in our presentation is that in all of our cases, the science has actually helped overcome political barriers. So we're not just doing it in spite of political barriers, but we're actually creating policies that are long-lasting, that are collaborative, that are bringing countries together. I think this has taken on additional significance. I think we all agree that there's a lot of political friction now all over the world. We're seeing now with Ukraine, where I work in Cuba and the United States, relations are tricky. And of course, in the Mediterranean, this has been going on, a lot of political friction, particularly between the North and South Mediterranean for millennia. So why this panel? Well, I've been working in Cuba. I'm Cuban American myself. I grew up in Florida, and I've been working in Cuba since 1998. And often I ask myself, why Cuba? Well, Cuba is where I'm from, for one, but there's also Cuba is very well connected to the United States, and this goes for all of the panelists, and that the ocean is this fluid sort of highway that connects organisms, right? Migratory species, whether they're active migrators, like say a sea turtle or a sperm whale, or they're passive migrators. They might be larvae that are just kind of going with the flow, maybe coral spawn, lobster larvae that just kind of pick up and go. They're very reliant on these ocean highways. These organisms don't really know where they're going. They don't know if they're in Russia or if they're in Korea or they're in Australia, right? They just go with the flow. So it's a contingent upon us as environmentalists, as scientists, to ensure that the policies are going beyond politics to protect these organisms. So in 2007, there are not many groups working in Cuba, but in 2007, we created something called the Trinational Initiative for Marine Science and Conservation in the Gulf of Mexico and Western Caribbean. And what we decided was to have a neutral platform where scientists from Mexico and Cuba could meet and talk about these shared marine resources. We broke them out into 6 different groups, working on sharks and rays, fisheries, marine protected areas, sea turtles, coral reefs, and fisheries. And this worked out really well. So we realized that providing this neutral space was very successful in getting scientists to speak freely and interact and collaborate and plan projects and share data. The following year in 2008, we agreed to bring Mexico into the Trinational Initiative. And this was a very astute decision, knowing that by regionalizing our work, it actually softens the work. By bringing in a third country, you bring a different mediator that might have good relations with both countries, right? Which is the case of Mexico. We can have meetings in Mexico because it's not always easy to work in Havana. And so by having Mexico involved, it then closed the entire Gulf of Mexico. And there was a brief opening in 2015 by the Obama administration to Cuba. And we were told by the State Department, NOAA Commerce, that it was the environment that was the low-hanging fruit that allowed these countries to talk. And that was just so touching for us that science did the trick. Science saved the day. Science provided that platform for 2 countries after 6 decades of stalemate to talk. And so we're very, very encouraged by that. That opening hasn't lasted as long as we like, but we're still at it with Cuba and Mexico. We've created something called the Red Golfo, which is the Gulf of Mexico Marine Protected Area Network, which has, again, all 3 countries involved, 11 marine protected areas, that is continuing to break down barriers and encourage collaboration. So knowing the projects and the panelists you're going to meet today, I know all of them, mostly through our CEO, Mark Spalding. Some of them are affiliated with the Ocean Foundation as well. I think all of them have some relationship. So we got thinking about how we ought to broadcast this message at a time when the world needs hope, the world needs tools more than anything, and these are working. And so we had a discussion. We agreed this panel would be relevant, and really to show that there are ways. When you look at space collaboration, and you put Soviet or Russian and U.S. scientists up in the International Space Station, they get along. They don't fight. They realize they're in a shared space, small space, and all those politics go out the window. Sometimes I think we need to put countries that don't get along at the bottom of the ocean in a submersible. Maybe we'd find the same kind of dynamic. So it's important because science can bring countries together and devise solutions. It can also be a back channel where when politics are bad, like say what's going on with Ukraine right now, there's science going on. And David Gordon will tell us a bit about it. And as you can see in his video, even as bad as things are, there's still science going on. There's still scientists shaking hands, working together, sharing data under the worst of circumstances. So I wanted to give a quick overview, an introduction of the 3 panelists, and then they're going to fill in anything I may have missed, and then we'll move into questions. So I wanted to start with Abed Rahman, who is a research scientist at GEOMAR in Germany. Abed is an oceanographer. He studies ocean acidification, which I can't think of one issue that affects the entire globe equally, at least coastal countries, as ocean acidification. As many of you know, the ocean is a sink. It absorbs more carbon dioxide than it can cope with, and because of that, in addition to heat that it's absorbing, it's affecting the chemistry of the ocean. So you're getting a more acidic ocean, and this is affecting particularly carbonate organisms. Think mollusks, mussels, lobster, coral reefs. And so it affects their ability to, and there are many other ways that ocean acidification is affecting these organisms, fisheries as well. It's compromising their ability to grow and basically literally grow a skeleton. So Abed runs the Ocean Acidification Med Hub, Mediterranean Hub, which is bringing together 12 countries in the Mediterranean, over 500 scientists that are working actively, similar to the Tri-National Initiative, where they're creating this safe space for the scientists to share data and discuss their findings and how they impact policy. Abed, if I'm missing anything, please chime in. But if that's spot on, I'll move on.
Thank you so much, Fernando, and thank you actually for having me here. Thank you for the audience for their interest in this very interesting seminar. Yes, so I'm Abdurrahman Hassoun. I'm a Lebanese researcher. I actually have now double affiliation. So I'm a researcher in the National Council for Scientific Research in Lebanon, and also in GEOMAR in Kiel in Germany. And as you've mentioned, Fernando, so now I'm actually responsible for the Ocean Acidification Mediterranean Hub, which is affiliated to the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, GOAON. So it's one of its regional hubs, and we are trying to bridge the gaps between scientists and now recently also stakeholders, policymakers from a certain region, to have this common ground between us and to communicate scientific ideas between scientists who are not usually sitting together, like, for example, nature-based scientists, economists, social scientists, etc., from really very diverse countries, culture, backgrounds, etc. So that's what we are doing somehow, and that's much relevant to this session's title.
Thank you, Abed. Very, very nice summary of all the work you're doing. Very hard to put it all into 60 seconds. Next is David Freestone, and he is the executive director of our Sargasso Sea Commission, which involves 10 different countries, over 2 million square miles of ocean. Not many people have heard of the Sargasso Sea. It's enormous. It's shared by several countries. It's all high seas, or mostly high seas. So imagine how tricky it is to govern ocean that belongs to everybody yet nobody. So in 2004, the Sargasso Sea Commission members signed the Hamilton Declaration, which David can tell us a bit about, which has then been updated, and they've received a $3 million grant from the Global Environmental Facility. So this agreement not only brought these countries together, but it spurred more action, which is exactly what we talk about with science diplomacy, that it's not just talk, but that we attract funders, we can bring more resources to that work. So David, if I missed anything, please proceed. Oh, you're muted. David, you're muted. I wonder if I can unmute him. David, I think we need to unmute. David, you're muted. Oh, no. Okay, here it is again.
Am I on now?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Right. All right. Sorry about that. We've been doing this for so long. We really should be able to click these buttons. I'm sorry. So, but you seem to hear me about the dates, right? So I'll go back to, as you said, basically, where is it? You said people probably hadn't heard of it. I think the issue is people have heard of it. It was as a famous novel by Jean Rhys called The Wide Sargasso Sea, but nobody knows where it is. And incidentally, that novel doesn't say anything about the Sargasso Sea at all. It's really a kind of strange title. So it's a huge gyre. It's a northeast subtropical Atlantic around the little islands of Bermuda. But as you said, mostly it's actually high seas. And the problem of the high seas, as you summarize, is exactly it. It belongs to nobody, or you could take the other view that it belongs to us all. And that's rather the view that we've taken with this approach. So because it's also doesn't, there isn't an effect. There's an unfinished agenda of governance to the high seas. There's a famous, the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention, but the high seas is really kind of outside the pale of real effective governance. So we don't have governance authority, where the 2014 Hamilton Declaration on Collaboration for the Conservation of the Sargasso Sea was actually really a political declaration, a non-binding. It's not a treaty, it's a non-binding declaration, which sets up a very loose governance structure for us, but which is intended to use the existing regimes, the fishery regime, the vessels regime, which is run by the International Maritime Organization, the Seabed Authority. There are governance organizations out there, but they aren't really that concerned about high seas ecosystems, right? So we provide, if you like, the idea of this is that we provide an overarching viewpoint of it. The commission, which is unusual because it's actually, most commissions are representatives of the signatory governments. These are actually independent experts appointed by the government of Bermuda, and the president of the Ocean Foundation, Mark Spalding, is one of our 7 commissioners. So we've got commissioners from the Azores, from the UK, from the Bahamas, from Bermuda, from Canada, and from the US. Those are most of our signatories. And as you're right, we've been struggling to try and get measures through the existing organizations to put a conservation regime in place for the Sargasso Sea. It's been, I say, about 10 years. We've had some successes, and Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization has closed off all the fishing on the seamounts to the north of the Sargasso Sea. We've been able to achieve some recognition of the importance of the Sargasso Sea as an area which is the only place in the world where the anguillid eels, the European American anguillid eels, spawn. They migrate from Europe and from the Americas, and then they go to the Sargasso Sea, spawn and die, and we don't know why. No one's ever actually witnessed it, so it's an amazing place. And we just got, as you said, we've got a large grant, what I regard as large, $3 million from the Global Environment Facility. We're going to do a definitive ecosystem assessment. And then we're using that. We hope to move forward with proposals for more effective stewardship and governance of this area. So it's I said in the presentation, I hope this is the beginning of our golden age. So we're delighted to give us the platform to tell others about it. Thanks. Back to you then, Fernando. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And the species that are relying on the Sargasso Sea that David didn't mention are tuna, billfish, loggerhead sea turtles. So imagine all of these species use this enormous habitat for rearing, for growing before they can then move in, into their foraging and into the rest of their life. So it takes on a huge amount of importance, and it's, as David mentioned, enormous, and shared with countries as far as Portugal, Canada. So thanks, David. I'll move on to our second David Gordon, who is the director of the Eurasian Conservation Fund. David has worked for decades in obviously a very tricky place, which is the Bering and Chukchi Seas. These are shared by Russia and the United States. Connected, the two landmasses are connected by this body of water, as I was saying earlier, very fluid. Fur seals, walruses, they move easily between these two countries, but the policies don't always address them. When I spoke to David last, he mentioned this first seal was the Seal Act or something. It was in like 1917 or something. That just goes to show
Northern Treaty, yeah,
the Northern Fur Seal Treaty. So this is, there you go. So for over 110 years, this, there's been collaboration, right? looking back then mostly as fur seals, northern fur seals, as a resource, and now the effort is more on their conservation. So I'll let David speak a bit about his work and the relevance, and then we can move on to questions.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you for organizing this panel and this discussion. So yeah, as you mentioned, I manage the Eurasian Conservation Fund, which is now an initiative at the Ocean Foundation. And this work in the Bering and Chukchi, this science diplomacy really focuses on bilateral cooperation between two countries. And this is driven by the fact that these two countries, Russia and the US, the regions being Chukotka in Russia and Alaska in the US, share a common ecosystem. They're really part of the same ecosystem defined by the Bering and Chukchi large marine ecosystem. And so because of that, we share wildlife populations, we share resources, we share the Alaska Chukotka polar bear population, the Pacific walrus population, both of which are incredibly important to indigenous subsistence, and in the region, as well as the overall health of the ecosystem. So those shared resources have really driven collaboration, despite quite well-known geopolitical tensions between the countries that date back to the Soviet period. What is interesting to me in this region is that the history of cooperation actually dates back very far. So back to the Soviet period. In the 1970s, the US and the Soviet Union at the time signed an environmental agreement, started joint aerial surveys of walruses and polar bears back in the 70s. And that collaboration, that very direct collaboration between scientists, has continued to this day. With ups and downs, sure, but despite all of the geopolitical tensions between the US and Russia that we read about in the newspaper every day, scientists in Alaska, in Russia are working together, finding ways to share information because they need to if we're going to sustainably manage those wildlife populations. So again, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this and share this experience with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I will start with the first question, which is for all of the panelists, and but I'll maybe raise your hand and I'll see who wants to answer it first. So as I was mentioning earlier, if you look globally, right, there's a lot of tension. I think this goes for almost any corner of the world, right? And I know Ukraine has been in the press a lot. I mean, it's funny because when David Gordon gave his video in December, he said, you know, this is how things are now, but I can't tell you how it's going to be in February. Lo and behold, there are 200,000 Russian troops at the Ukrainian border. So what I wanted to ask is, why does science diplomacy matter now in that context? How can it be used? What's its use as a tool for a global audience? How can it make things better now? I know that's a broad one, but I think you guys knowing your region so well and having seen the success and the ability to bring maybe rival or scientists from antagonistic countries, say, like, you've seen that firsthand. So how can this help? How can this be used as a tool? I'll start with Abed.
I'm gonna unmute myself. Well, actually, science knows no boundaries, and taking that into consideration, that actually any scientific product is not a property of any nation; it's a property of the universe. So when we actually have good observations, because here we are talking about the ocean and the climate change science, ocean acidification consequences, things like this. So when we have good observations, we are tracking a specific a climate change consequence or an environmental issue. That issue will not affect a nation or a country specifically. Okay, that will affect a region, but also when we are talking about climate change, it's affecting the Earth. And if we will not collaborate together in order to better understand this phenomena and to try to tackle this phenomena, we will be all doomed with our current conflicts. Okay, so that's something that scientists are actually aware of, but unfortunately, lots of policymakers are not really prioritizing such universal issues now. And unfortunately, we are living in an era where businesses and economies are prioritized, but it's time for us scientists now to actually step in this, let's say, image of policies and governance and etc., and to say that, come on, guys, what you are doing actually is affecting us, affecting the humanity. We need long-term strategies. Even if you have some specific issues, political problems, we need to overcome some of that, okay, and to try to find solutions for all of us. Otherwise, we will be all doomed, and our conflicts will mean nothing in that time.
So scientists don't like being put in that position, Abed, right? Scientists, the last thing most scientists want are to be envoys, to be in these political situations. And you're saying scientists need to do more. Yeah,
exactly. Actually, this is something that we scientists now we are more aware of, that we need to be more incorporated and involved in those bridges between policymakers, stakeholders, and scientists, but also between nature scientists and economists, marine spatial planners, philanthropists, etc., because we used actually to have these small communities of scientists from a certain or specific, let's say, specialty or specific field of research. But no, we need to open up to other disciplines, but also to other types of audiences. And one of the audiences that we need to incorporate and to involve in our work, and maybe to familiarize some terms to them and some consequences, etc., are the policymakers, the stakeholders. And that's why now lots of initiatives are actually, like, for example, the Ocean Acidification Mediterranean Hub. We are trying now to gain more visibility in the policy sphere, actually to invite policymakers to increase the awareness about ocean acidification, about climate change in general, and to show them on how they can tackle it. And if they have questions, if they have like some gaps of knowledge that we can clarify. If, for example, they are not so, let's say, good in understanding some plots, some maps, some results, scientific results. So what are the best ways maybe to communicate such really so scientific information to them? So in order for them to not have excuses to better govern or to better tackle such very, very, very important and universal issues.
David Freestone.
Yes,
how about you?
Yeah,
Do you see, is this more about a hope tool, or is it effective as bringing countries in your region? How do you see your intervention?
Yeah, excellent. And I should fess up, right, in a meeting of the AAAS that I'm actually a lawyer. So I have a doctorate, but my doctorate is in international law. But I came into this because this is a really interesting area of law of the sea, right, that we're talking about a high seas governance issue. So that's how I got into it. But what we decided right at the beginning was that the way that we would persuade governments to join the enterprise and also to take action, members of organizations like the Fisheries Organization, the International Maritime Organization, Seabed Authority, the way we persuade them is by good science, right? I think this is the basic position that we've taken. And so we have a very, very strong science team. I mean, very, very impressive science team, which I'm very proud of. And so we've been able to use that to, I think, to make the case for some very, important measures which would change the way that the governance is done generally in the high seas. And you know, part of this is that, you know, a shared resource like the Sargasso Sea, you mentioned, yeah, and thank you for coming in with that. You mentioned tunas, right? Well, tuna, there is an organization, the International Convention for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas, which WWF rather naughtily calls the International Conspiracy to Catch All Tunas. You've probably heard that. But ICCAT is actually quite an important governance arrangement for the Atlantic, and tunas are basically what it regulates. So that covers that. Everybody's interested in that. So if you can provide evidence of, you know, the catches that are taking place in our area, and we are unfortunately not a spawning area for the famous bluefin tuna, but the bluefins do pass through the Sargasso Sea as part of their migratory routes. But also you mentioned the loggerheads, but actually 5 of the sea turtle species actually spend their lost years in the Sargasso Sea. They've provided them a habitat where they can grow. You know, they come off the beaches very tiny, and then suddenly they're, you know, a foot long. So what happened to them? And they hide in the Sargasso Sea. And it's important for other species as well. I mentioned the European eels and the American eels. So all that has amazing financial implications for the countries surrounding it. The Canadians have quite an important eel industry. In Europe, and especially in the Far East, there's been a burgeoning trade, unsustainable, we argue, trade in glass eels, the tiny ones which are taken to Asia and then fattened up and then sold back to the sushi trade. And this is putting a lot of pressure on a species which is already critically endangered. So it's the science argument which gets you to the table, I think, and to actually persuade others to join. One of our signatory governments is Monaco. There's no interest in the Sargasso Sea, except that it's an area of the high seas which they think needs to be governed properly. So I think that's sort of the overarching agenda for what we've been trying to do. Thank you.
David Gordon. I won't mention Ukraine, except I will. So yeah, why does this matter now? How can what you're doing, which is very behind the scenes in terms of, you know, what's going on in front of all of us right now, how does that matter? How do you tell your story now when people ask you about, you know, how it all matters?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say I absolutely support and agree with everything that Abed and David said. And I think it applies in this region, right? So again, we have a mandate in this region that we need to cooperate if we want to sustainably manage and conserve the ocean resources in this large region. Yes, there are incredible challenges in the relationships between Russia and the US right now, involving Ukraine, involving in other places in the world. What I've always been impressed with in the past is, despite those challenges, the countries seek ways to cooperate where it makes sense to both countries. So I'm reminded of the time in 1990 when Mikhail Gorbachev and George H.W. Bush came out with a joint statement about the importance of the Bering region and the idea that there could be shared conservation measures in the region. This led to the shared Beringia Heritage Program, a program of the National Park Service and Beringia National Park in Russia. Again, that was done to find ways the countries could collaborate while there were disagreements elsewhere. And so I believe it's always important to find those. Just to give one more recent example, just a few years ago, the International Maritime Organization, David Freestone mentioned them, they approved new shipping corridors in the Bering Sea, in the Bering Strait region, based on science that had been done jointly by Russia and the US, right? So recognizing that there is increased shipping in the Arctic, there as a result of climate change, as a result of growing economic activity, Russia has stated that it wants to develop the Northern Sea Route in an ecologically responsible way. Well, what are the policy measures you need to do that, and how should those policy measures be informed by science? So scientific research informed new shipping corridors, got proposed by both countries, Russia and the US together, to the IMO, which then approved it. So there are very real world and practical applications of science diplomacy to policy measures right now, and I think that we need to always seek those opportunities for collaboration, despite what might happen elsewhere on the front pages of the newspapers.
Thank you. I wanted to see if there are other questions from the audience before I proceed with the next one. There's an ability through Q&A to send your question there. I'm happy to deliver it to the panelists.
There's some right in our chat too.
Yeah. Oh, I've missed those.
On the, I can read
Please.
a couple.
Go ahead, Kim.
If you like, I saw those.
Go ahead, David. So let me just read it out loud.
It says,
so
are there any
asking,
specific, are there any specific strategies to try and conserve or protect eels? So here, this is actually quite, I love this one because thank you for the question. It's a good one. These are the anguillid eels we're talking about. These migratory eels, 3,000, 4,000 miles, takes them maybe 6 months to swim from Europe to the Sargasso Sea, and then they die. The little guys, takes them about 6 months, maybe longer, maybe even 2 years to actually drift back to the Europe. They're not like, they're the reverse of salmon. We don't think they go back to the place where they were, where their parents lived, but there's obviously a lot of synergy in that system. It's very similar. They're called catadromous as opposed to anadromous, as a scientist I'm sure know. So what we did was, and this is how we tried to get this to work, we did a very strong case using International Union for the Conservation of Nature, their anguillid eel group, for the listing of European eels under the Conventional Migratory Species, Appendix 2. Appendix 2 envisages the listing of species which would benefit from international collaboration for their conservation. So we did the case. I hawked it round, if I could be crude in that way, of saying to amongst my signatory governments, and Monaco said, "Yeah, we'll do it. It's complicated. We're not a member of the EU. We'll do it. We don't have any eels, but we think it's important." So Monaco took it up. They took it to the science body. They argued the case with the help of the scientists that we'd taken on, and then they went to the convention, was approved. And since then, we've had a series of workshops. I think 3, 4 now, actually, workshops where we've discussed measures to be taken. We were quite keen on the idea of a treaty, but there wasn't support, particularly amongst some of the European countries. So what we have is a single species action plan, and we're in the process of just finalizing that, which will be approved then by the parties to the Conventional Migratory Species, which unfortunately the US is not a party, nor is Canada, which we're hoping, because we were hoping to do the same for the American eel. But there you are. There's a diplomatic issue comes in as well. But the CMS will include a number of measures, which we hope will include conservation measures, at sea. So that's my ideal would have been a treaty, but we can live to fight another day on that. So thank you. That's a good question, and still lots more to do, but that's not the answer, but it's one of them.
Well, thanks, David. And so speaking of treaties, the next question is actually about the Antarctic Treaty, which is due to expire shortly. And Nicholas is asking, says it has been an example of common ground administration, although it is not easily to be renewed. How important is this treaty for science diplomacy? If anybody can speak to that specific treaty.
As an international lawyer, I suppose I ought to have a good shot at it anyway. It's a difficult one. It's a very, the whole thing about the Antarctic Treaty, it's an Antarctic Treaty system rather than just the treaty. So the Antarctic Treaty is the cornerstone. And if you remember, it put the claims to sovereignty in suspension while it was in place. So I really wouldn't like to speculate as to the chances of its renewal. But if it weren't renewed, it would be a calamity, because one of the most effective, probably, conservation maritime conservation organizations is CAMLR, the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. It's not really a fisheries organization, it's more than that, but it does also manage fishing resources very well. And if the foundation for that regime were to go away in the Antarctic Treaty itself, then it would bring the other sort of functional regimes under question as well. So not a one-word answer, really difficult, and certainly an area for science diplomacy.
Good. So a lot of your groups, they work on networks, right? Networks that are often reporting back to the group. Some of your platforms are networks themselves. What are your goals for those networks? How do you keep them organized? How do you keep them motivated? And if you want to give a description as well as how they work within your organizations, keep it brief because we're down to 7 minutes. But I guess how do your platforms rely on networks? David Gordon.
Sure, thanks. Well, I think, yes, I think you're exactly right. We all rely on networks, and we're all trying to foster networks in whatever way that might be. I'll say that for our region, we try to cooperate a bit more informally as a network. One of the ways we're doing so, and I put some links in the chat about this, is to create a news platform to share news across the border. Language barriers make it really tough for people in Russia to understand what's going on in Alaska, and vice versa for people in Alaska, for scientists to know what's going on in Chukotka or other parts of the Russian Arctic. So we foster a common or a monthly news review, and we're also now using new development. We're using social media channels of Twitter and Telegram to share news about marine conservation and stewardship, make sure that we're all working from a common basis of information. We can all learn about reports that are getting released, whether they're in Russian or in English, and we find that really helpful. So if folks would like to join those networks and get to learn more about that region, I put the links in the chat for that.
Yeah, quickly, David, I'm going to send a quick poll. We want to get an idea of where kind of area of the world and networks we're talking about, what people are most interested in. So I'm going to throw this up, and then you can continue talking, David.
Okay, so I mean, I would just reiterate support very much what David Gordon said. I mean, because we have a number of, we have 10 governments, right? But we also have, I think, more than 30 collaborating partners. And these include, you know, Woods Hole and the Plymouth Marine Lab, the Southampton Marine Lab in the UK. There's a number of other really important, and Bermuda Institute for Ocean Science, which is right in the middle of the Sargasso Sea, which has the longest running ocean time series in the world. But we've also got some much a more kind of not innovative, but different types of partnerships as well. With NASA, we have a fantastic relationship with NASA, who have a pilot project, and it's called Coverage, and it's worth looking at it because it's an amazing website. It's a program which uses the Sargasso Sea as a pilot to a way in which it could use all its remote sensing data to make it available as a sort of governance tool, so you could see, and then they overlay it with animal telemetry, and we hope, we hasn't got there yet, but also with vessel movements through using the AAAS system. So, I mean, for example, one particularly vivid image, I think, is of a shark, a tagged shark, and it's sort of winding its way across the ocean in a apparently completely meaningless way, and then you overlay it with ocean temperature, and it's following the thermocline quite clearly. So all this sort of data helps you to make decisions on where particular measures might be put in place, and which areas need to be more protection than others. So all these particular networks are, and it's important to keep, what we've also been able to do is to put the networks together, so we're making linkages where, because we're looking at an ecosystem rather than a particular discipline, where others haven't been made. So that's, I think, one of the things which a high seas ecosystem makes it unique.
Good. Abed, please talk about.
Yeah, in the OA Med Hub, actually, we are trying to be somehow organizational and to establish like a structure in order to sustain this Ocean Acidification Mediterranean Hub, which is mainly gathering scientists, and because it is very diverse, connecting, as I've mentioned, 12 countries, more than 70 scientists from different disciplines. It is very interesting for us to actually have this systematic organization. So that's why we have steering committee. All the members from a certain countries, from a certain country have elected actually their representative, and we meet from time to time actually, and we are trying also to disseminate a newsletter the way that David Gordon has mentioned. It's really very interesting to always actually maintain a certain communication. And because we are also trying to involve new people, new youngsters and new generation and things like this. So we are trying also to highlight opportunities of PhDs, masters, scientific cruises that can be actually very useful for scientists in that area. But actually, one of the main problems we are trying to solve in our hub is to reduce the discrepancy between the South Mediterranean countries' science. So because actually now we are trying to check who's doing what in the hub, in the Mediterranean countries, and unfortunately the main ocean acidification conclusions are mainly actually derived from European institutions, and even in our hub, so more than 60% are from northern Mediterranean countries, and we are trying to reduce this and to make this type of science manageable and studied by everyone, by all. We are trying to simplify some techniques so scientists and colleagues from other areas of the Mediterranean and other also in other areas of the world to start actually ocean acidification research, because this is something very, very, very important to have this long-term and sustainable time series or observational time series. As David Freestone has mentioned before, it's very crucial to have this science-based evidences. And that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to support each other. So when we launch from time to time surveys in order to check the obstacles and to try to solve. We are very young hub, however, we are trying actually to manage to communicate and to bridge the gaps between those who are actually very developed in ocean acidification science and who are just starting or trying to start actually.
Great, Abed, I really appreciate that. We're going to wrap up, except you got me thinking on something with our own trinational initiative that I think has been very successful, which is when you create these neutral platforms with equal standing, the science priorities of the lesser developed countries get represented. So in the case with our network, which is Cuba, Mexico, the United States, the Cubans do complain that their priorities aren't represented. Mexico gets this a lot with the United States. So it's a good point that it allows all of the countries to express their scientific priorities at equal standing. And that's something I think that is one of the priorities of science diplomacy. That's the whole point of talking, is that you can get away from this discrepancy and get equal saying, right, through working together. So
that's, I think, the most crucial thing that we really need to increase the visibility of scientists in underrepresented areas, because they feel, especially in very high profile events, that they are not well represented, they are not well involved and integrated. Although they are there, actually, you only have to Google their names and to search for them. However, they do not have the means actually and maybe the resources to be engaged in such important events and projects, proposals, etc.
Good. We are over time. Unfortunately, it's been a fascinating discussion, and I've spoken with all of you panelists already about this, and I want to keep going. Except we're over time, and if there's interest from anyone in the audience to reach out to any of the scientists, I put my email here, but I think you can find them on the AAAS platform. But if it's easier just to email me, I'm happy to introduce. I wanted to thank the panelists. I wanted to thank AAAS. Again, was mentioned the AAAS David and Betty Hamburg Award for Science Diplomacy that was mentioned in the chat. Congratulations to the winner there, and you can see the video about that. So I commend AAAS for this prize and honoring some of the scientists that are working so hard to bridge these gaps, as we say, build bridges through conservation. So David, Abed, and David, thank you so much. And thanks to AAAS. I see something here? No, we're good. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Gracias.